And it's going live to YouTube right now. All right, we are live, so now we will get right into the meeting. So thank you everyone for attending today. We'll start by going over the agenda for the meeting. Hello, Peter Filter in here. The agenda today, we'll start with welcome and introductions. We'll go around the room here and then I will read off folks that have joined us virtually. We'll then be having our feature presentation, which is titled Global and Local Freight Movement from Stefan Pezdek, Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. This is a very similar presentation to the one that the Port Authority gave at the recent NYSAMPO conference, which will also go over the freight presentations given there. After the feature presentation, we will go into our discussion items for today. That includes the summary of the NYSAMPO freight presentations, like I said. We'll then go over the 2025 to 2030 Transportation Improvement Program. That's our capital program here at the Transportation Council. And we'll review what projects for that received freight funding, or what projects that received freight scores were funded. We'll then go over our In-Motion 2050 plan. That's our long-range metropolitan transportation plan that we're currently updating. Then we will talk about the over-dimension truck routing technical assistance that we've been working on here at the Transportation Council for a while, the current status and our next steps that we're working on at the moment. We'll then have a brief update about our Capital District Clean Communities program. The agenda and slides say that Adam Carville will be giving that information. He is not here today, so I will go over that for him. We'll then have a discussion about the I-87 Exit 16 bridge replacement project that DOT is leading. Valerie here will talk us through that discussion. We'll then have a period for some member updates. Anyone who has anything they want to share with the group will be welcome to share at that time. And then we'll just go over the upcoming meetings for the rest of the year. So to start with introductions, I'll begin. I'm Ethan Townsend. I'm with the Capital Region Transportation Council. Following the departure of Chris Bauer, who ran this group for many years, I am taking on the freight program. He's got some pretty big shoes to fill, but I'm excited to be here and working with you all to address the region's freight needs. So we'll switch it out right next.
Valerie Dean, New York State Department of Transportation, Region 1.
I'm Megan Daly from the Port of Albany.
Ed Thompson, New York State DOT Regional Food Bank, and the Shaker Group retired, still driving for Hertz Car Rental.
Peter Comenzo with Town Auditing.
Claudette Paul with Plug Power.
Mike Uzdebski with Plug Power. I'm Jim Motion from Dagan Trucking.
I'm Sandy Miswitz. I'm the Executive Director of the Transportation Council.
Great, and then online we have Stephen Pezdek with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, Thomas Houlihan, Director of Planning with the City of Rensselaer, David Solitz, Director of Transportation with Price Chopper and Market 32, Dr. Catherine Lawson with the University at Albany, John Davidson with DA Collins Construction, Gautam Mani, Senior Community Planner with the FHWA New York Division, Parker Morris with the Transportation Council, and Leah Rye with the Transportation Council. So let me make Stefan a co-host. All right, Stefan, you should be able to share your screen now. Let me stop sharing. I'll move our Zoom up to where everyone can see it.
Okay. Thanks, Ethan. I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yep, we can.
Great. So first off, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I do want to preface all of this by saying that I am originally from the Capital District region, originally from Rensselaer County. So I am very familiar with a lot of the transportation networks throughout the region, as well as well attuned to how the operations that we have down here at the Port of New York and New Jersey and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey kind of affect not just the immediate metro area around New York City, but also much more broadly throughout the broader region. My role is as the regional freight planning manager for the agency, and I'm looking at all sort of freight moves from maritime to railroad to highway, as well as air cargo movements, and how those really affect the region as a broad stroke, from Boston to Buffalo, from here to Montreal, and all the way down to places like Baltimore as well. So as I walk through this, I welcome any questions, but I'll also have some time at the end for additional questions as well. So just to give a quick overview of what I'm going to be speaking to today, I'm going to give everybody a quick understanding of who the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is, what the global freight landscape looks like, how things essentially move from one side of the world to our region. And then I'm going to go into a little explainer in terms of how things actually kind of move from the Port of New York and New Jersey and from global markets into the capital region. And then I'll also speak about a few current headwinds that I'm sure many of my private sector friends here on the call will be familiar with, and how we're kind of talking about those down here as well. And then I'll open it up for Q&A. So first off, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is just a little over 100 years old. We're the first really authority that was ever created within the U.S. We were created by an act of Congress back in 1921. We are also the first bi-state agency. We are overseen by both governors of New York and New Jersey, and we are a financially self-supporting agency. So you can see on this slide here, you can see all of the facilities that we oversee and operate, everything from JFK Airport, George Washington Bridge, the Midtown Bus Terminal, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, basically all of the connections between New York and New Jersey, roadway connections, as well as the majority of the container terminal operations throughout the harbor, and then several other transportation facilities and airports around the New York City metro region. So just to kind of zoom in on our footprint at on the maritime side, this is a map of the Upper Harbor or Upper New York Bay and Newark Bay. Most of the Port Authority maritime facilities are based in New Jersey. We have here Port Newark, Port Elizabeth. These are the ones, if anybody's traveling down 95, you'll often see the cranes in the distance. We also have Holland Hook here on Staten Island. And then we have a facility here, Port Jersey, that's on the Bayonne portion of New Jersey. This is Hudson County over here. We also have one of the few operating rail floats across the harbor. So this is a rail car harbor float. It takes rail cars, puts it on a barge, moves it across the harbor to Brooklyn and then out into Long Island. Otherwise, all rail movements would have to go all the way up to Albany and then cross over and then come all the way back down in order for any rail movements to cross the Hudson River. So this actually takes about 72 trucks off the road every time this float moves across the harbor. And it moves everything from lumber to waste materials to different hazmat materials as well. Forgive me. So I also, one of my other roles is I lead the GMAP group, which is a regional collective of freight-focused members from New York State DOT, New Jersey DOT, New York City DOT, New York City Economic Development Corporation, and New Jersey EDA, as well as the Port Authority. And we're looking at all of these different modes of transportation in order to work across jurisdictional lines to make sure that there's more harmony and fluidity built into the system. And a lot of what we're looking at is not just the maritime, the air cargo, the rail and truck movements, but also last mile, the warehousing systems that are there. Also, we're focused on resiliency and sustainability, how those systems are evolving, what the new technologies, what the new systems that are coming into play, how those will interoperate with each other, allowing for more capacity development and growth throughout the region, but also looking at the labor side of that and also the energy demands that those also bring in too. So just to kind of talk about the global landscape and how that kind of comes in through our port and how that really influences our operations. Globally, looking at this, the vast majority of goods movements kind of flow in this direction. Vietnam is kind of the location where in which goods movements from Vietnam and west typically flow through the east coast of the U.S. And by typically, I mean 51% of the goods moving out of those countries move through the U.S. East Coast. The other side, the other West Coast ports are picking up the vast majority of production that's coming from places like China, Japan, South Korea, and also Indonesia and the Philippines. And so really the two sides of the coast really kind of come together. And this is what is the backbone of our trade economy right now. As you can kind of see, this is the typical flows. There's a lot of movement through the canal systems. We do have about 30% of our commodities that come in. I'm sorry, excuse me. 20% of our commodities that come into the Port of New York and New Jersey is based from China. But the vast majority of our importing is coming from places like Germany, India, Vietnam, and other places more to the west of the Chinese market. And once it comes to any of the port systems, it hits the intermodal network. So not just trucks picking up and draying containers out of the port, but also through the barge operations that we have. There's container movements that move across the harbor on a barge. We also have a vast intermodal rail system. And our intermodal rail system usually takes up somewhere between 15 and 20% of the goods that come into our port. So just to kind of break down how things come in and move through the region once it actually enters our port, and to kind of break this down in terms of how much volume we're really talking. Now, in the industry, in the port industry, we speak in TEUs. Those are 20-foot equivalent units. 20-foot equivalent unit is those smaller containers that you see usually on the highway. A full long-sized container that is typically sitting on the back of the truck, that's called a 40-foot unit. But we measure everything based on 20-foot equivalents. And so just this past year, we moved 8.7 million loaded TEUs, or 20-foot equivalent units, through the Port of New York and New Jersey. This is the busiest port on the East Coast. It's also by volume, we take up about 34% of the East Coast volume, and also we trade back and forth between being the second and third busiest port in the U.S. So right now we're about 23rd largest in the worldwide in terms of our market size. And what's really feeding the demand for that is the broad area in which we cover. You can see in this map here, we cover in the first hour for a truck to leave one of our facilities. It takes about an hour for them to reach about 13 million people. In 2 hours, they can reach 28 million people, and by 4 hours, they can reach 46 million people. Now, when you spread this out to looking at where they can cover in about an 8-hour drive, we're talking Toronto, Montreal, we're talking places like Cleveland, and we're talking all the way down to Raleigh, North Carolina. So we actually can cover in a very short amount of time over 150 million people, which means that the market that all of these containers are coming to is really stretched well across the Eastern Seaboard. And we're supporting a vast network of not only manufacturing facilities, delivery companies, food production, food movement, food delivery companies, and grocery stores, but we're also covering a lot of different jobs, a lot of different markets in terms of being able to work both import and export as well. So when we talk about the importance and significance of how the Port of New York and New Jersey, although it seems very far away from whether it's Albany or Buffalo, we actually have a tremendous impact on the local economies for everybody. And looking further out, as I talked before, we have a significant amount of our movement out of our ports is on rail. So our rail network is actually connects a vast amount of the country as well. We easily reach out to Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City, as well as all the way out to St. Paul, Minnesota, on a regular basis. Again, we also connect up with our folks up in Canada. And we utilize CSX and Norfolk Southern as our primary connectors. They actually have an interfacing local railroad called Conrail that actually helps manage a lot of the inner operations around our facilities. And so last year we had over 150 million annual lifts of containers onto rail and moved that to over 50 different destinations. And so if you really kind of, I'm sorry, excuse me, we did 640 rail lifts, but we have the capacity to expand that out to 150 million rail lifts. So I want to take this opportunity. I've just kind of shown you how the network works and where things are coming from and how things move. And I want to kind of put this into practice a little bit to kind of give everybody on the call an understanding of how some of this freight works and how this really moves. I know that many of the folks who are working in private industry on this call realize that they are well attuned to how their supply chain works, but sometimes they aren't always aware of how all the other different facets work that are supporting it. So I like to use this example because when I've had to work with some of my Canadian friends, they often really enjoy this as an example. But in this case, we're gonna look at the beginning of hockey season, and Rensselaer is going to be needing a whole pallet of hockey pucks for the early start of the season. So they're going to go online, they're going to order their hockey pucks, and they're going to be looking for this delivery to come to them, hopefully in the next couple of days. But let's talk about the journey that this hockey puck had to actually travel on for them to actually get this. So what's interesting to find out is that the vast majority of hockey pucks are only made in 4 different locations around the world: China, Russia, Canada, and the Czech Republic. In this example, we're going to use the Czech Republic just because it gives us a little bit more interesting flavor of how the network really works. But they'll be manufactured in the Czech Republic. They'll be processed and boxed and palletized and then moved onto a container. And then they'll be moved from the factory here to a intermodal yard. They'll be moved by truck to an intermodal yard in Prague in the Czech Republic. And then from there, that intermodal yard will then rail them to Rotterdam, which is one of the major ports in Europe. And then it's put onto a large container vessel to be brought over to the US East Coast. So now it'll traverse, and that container vessel will likely make a couple of stops along the way. It may stop at Felixstowe in the UK, as well as a couple other stops along the way. And then it'll arrive on the US East Coast. Now, the Port of New York and New Jersey is usually typically a first port of call, which means we're one of the first places in which cargo is unloaded. Mainly because that frees up more capacity to be able to take on empty containers. It frees up more movement for exports, and then also allows the ship to go on and pick up and drop off in other locations. But usually, it's moving the bulk of its material off at the Port of New York and New Jersey. And in this time frame, usually from Europe, it takes 12 to 20 days for it to arrive on the US East Coast, depending upon sea conditions and other things. So in this case, it ends up coming into one of our facilities. This one is MAR Terminal here at the Elizabeth Marine Terminal. And it's unloaded and it's held for a certain amount of time until somebody can either pick it up for drayage, or it can be transferred to rail. Now, in this scenario, it's actually going to be offloaded by these container cranes into a stack, and then it's going to be put onto an intermodal rail because looking at the bill of lading, which controls the movement of and the directions of where this is supposed to end up. This is actually supposed to end up to a facility out in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so it'll be railed out on the CSX line across New York State and then all the way to Chicago, where it gets switched to another one of the other railroads operating out of there, and then brought up to St. Paul. Now it'll take 2 or 3, maybe 4 days for it to make it all the way to St. Paul, but definitely 2 days to make it to Chicago. From there, it gets picked up at an intermodal yard, and then it'll be drayed over to the local warehouse and for the distributor that imported it. Once it's been brought into that distributor's warehouse, they'll figure out who the customer is. Now, in this case, Rensselaer was looking to purchase this through Dick's Sporting Goods. So Dick's Sporting Goods will put in a request to this distributor to resupply their stock that they need, and so that distributor will ship this out to Dick's Sporting Goods local distribution hub here in Binghamton. Now that'll operate on a 53-foot truck, which is pretty standard for what we see on the highway, probably utilizing an over the roadway trucker, and moving that may take several days, depending upon if this is an LTL, which is less than a truckload, or if this is a full truckload movement. So in this case, we're just going to use the straight full truckload movement at this point. From there, from Binghamton, this will then get held in Dick's Sporting Goods' warehouse until that distribution needs to be fulfilled, until that order needs to be fulfilled. And this is the point in which the engagement for the people who are ordering this, that, those folks who are ordering this online are actually navigating the click buy button on their screen. So this is where we actually typically activate that conversation. So now they've clicked purchase. Dick's Sporting Goods now moves this to one of the last mile delivery systems, whether that's FedEx, UPS, DHL, or a smaller third-party company that might be doing one of those other functions. This will get moved to the distribution facility for FedEx. It'll get put on either a tandem trailer like this, or it'll be put onto a single 53-footer for movement. And then it'll get brought up here to the distribution facility over on Route 4 over in East Greenbush. From then, it'll get put on this last mile final delivery vehicle, which most of us are much more familiar with seeing, and that'll be delivered at the field house in time. Now, if we look at what the whole broad section of what this ended up actually being like, this took one container vessel about 4,500 miles to move. It took at least 5 truck moves. There may have been some other ones in there for repositioning and things like that we aren't always aware of. There's at least 2 intermodal rail moves, plus switching in Chicago. So, but about 2,000 miles worth of movement, and then 1 last mile delivery vehicle. And just to remember, for all of us, most of the time we only see that last mile delivery vehicle. So there's always a much bigger chain of events going on beyond what we typically see at our end of the spectrum. And so I just want to also highlight, how does this work as an export? And so using an example of a hot sauce distributor that operates out of Rochester, it's pretty straightforward for anybody that does any exporting, but essentially the cargo is prepped, it's put into a container, it gets moved from Rochester. It's actually typically moved onto an intermodal rail yard, either at Buffalo or Syracuse, and then railed down to the Port of New York and New Jersey on CSX, and then put out to be able to be shipped out overseas. A pretty straightforward, situation, but again, there's still truck movements, there's still rail movements involved, there's still a lot of other activities that play into this, and it's good to understand how connected our local operations and our local manufacturing are to the much more global trade. So now it's kind of switching gears to some of the challenges that I brought up earlier, which is the challenges around current freight headwinds. realizing that not only are there global tensions that are impacting some of the decisions about how we ship or where we ship from or where we're importing goods and materials from, but also there's some political and economic sort of challenges that also come with that. For instance, challenges that are in the Middle East, specifically around the Red Sea, have created a lot of additional demands and capacity needs by the ocean carriers to route around the Suez Canal in order to make sure that they can make their moves and deliver to market as they're required to. There's also challenges about global climate issues. Droughts in the Panama Canal impacted the capacity that the canal could actually take in terms of moving materials and ships through it in a regular pattern. They actually had to draw down the number of vessels that they could move through it last summer, and from 32 vessels a day to I think it was 25. That slowed a lot of shipping and a lot of shipping movements, and people were looking for alternatives. We're also seeing that the outcome and impacts of tariff language and tariff, what I would call the aggressive nature and movement of tariffs and the uncertainty that that's bringing is also causing a lot of heartburn within the supply chain. And having a lack of clarity on that in terms of what to expect tomorrow or the next day in terms of the costs for shipping and moving goods and materials is definitely having a lot of concerns in terms of availability, capacity, and also demand as well. It's also affecting prices and challenging how everybody is doing business on a, I would say, minute by minute basis. In addition to that, I'd also like to call out that those effects really yo-yo throughout the whole system. So as new tariffs have been announced, we've also seen that that in reaction, container operators need to now balance out their capacity so that they are not competing against each other at rock bottom prices. So they are always trying to meet the capacity demands on a regular basis, which also impacts labor and impacts overall economic health of the freight network. And so, there's been a lot of challenges out there, and a lot of people have really been trying to optimize their supply chain. Unfortunately, we've seen that there's a lot of concerns about over optimization for one moment, and then finding that all of a sudden it really changes the metrics on what's helpful for anybody at any given time. So right now, we're kind of hoping that we can continue to see positive movements back to lower tariffs to help continue the fluidity, but we're still in a wait and see game, as I'm sure most of you are as well. With that, I'll just kind of close. Sometimes it's really lost on us when we're working locally to understand how global impacts and global challenges really affect us on a day-to-day basis. But it's important to understand that also our local issues and our local challenges can also have reflexive impacts on the global market as well. Freight movements and across the region are actually incredibly complex and have a lot of very, very important interdependencies on them. And that they're also critical for all local economies, and many of our local economies are intimately tied together on this. And that having multiple modes of transportation options are really critical for resiliency throughout, not only throughout individual regions, but throughout the whole supply chain network. So with that, I'll just open this up for questions.
Great, thank you, Stefan. So I have a couple questions myself, but I'll see if anyone in the room or anyone on Zoom has any questions they'd like to ask with Stefan first. Good.
I don't have a question, but I am jealous as hell of your position, and let me explain. In the early 1960s, I did a paper in political science on the power of the Port of New York Authority and how they were able to get certain things done in regard to the two state agencies they dealt with. I acquired a CDL for a tractor trailer along the way. And then I got a PhD in geography from Syracuse, so I wish I had had your job about 30 years ago.
I would say that I've had a very, very broad set of experiences. So likewise, I came from a very different world and have ended up falling into the world of freight. Before I had this role, I was the port manager for Port Jersey. I was in charge of the operations for Port Jersey and oversaw a lot of movement during COVID and all the challenges that came with it. So, and prior to that, I was actually an architect for the agency. So I've had a very different sort of skill set that have come along the way. So thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
Mike, got a question?
Yeah, I had a question for you, Stephen. I saw one of your bullets was on sustainability. And I guess my question is with the IMO in 2050 and, you know, the recent turn of event in renewables within the US in the last couple months, how do you see that playing out with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey in the coming years? Are you still, you know, all in on moving towards renewable energy, you know, fuel for the vessels? I'd like to understand a little bit about your thoughts on sustainability in the port.
Yeah, no problem. And it's a great question. So let me start off by saying that we have a mandate for our agency that we are net zero by 2050. That has not changed regardless of whatever administration or attitude there is. We are still committed to that. The incredibly challenging part of that, though, is that we only have control over our scope 1 and 2 emissions. I think that it totals on the high side of like 15% of our total emissions. So those are the parts that we can control. We are incredibly invested in trying to take down and reduce our scope 3 emissions. In terms of sustainable aviation fuel, we've been working really closely with our airline partners to work out how we can do that, where we can get that, how we can better source that. California's clean fuel rules really have made it a challenge for us to be able to get more SAF into our system. But you know what? We're also looking at it in the broader strokes of we were able to be rewarded a $400 million EPA grant for our Clean Ports program. And so that's going to be going into investing into cleaner equipment within the port, cleaner operations within the port. Almost all of our cranes are now electric or totally electrified. It also is going to be covering shore power for some of our vessels. We've been exploring with a number of the ocean carriers how we can help support their emissions goals. And we've also been talking about trying to find out how and where we can get and foster a local development of some of the clean fuels that need to be developed. So for instance, we've been looking at where we can source methanol, where can we source, even if it's blue methanol, pink methanol, I'm sorry, pink hydrogen, blue hydrogen, as well as methanol, as well as clean source LNG. We've even gone so far as to talk to Cornell's Cooperative about a number of where the dairy farms, what they're doing in terms of being able to develop renewable LNG and what the opportunities for that are right now. It seems like they actually are producing a lot less than what we need. And so we're trying to find different ways of attacking that problem. And it's a huge problem. It's a lot of chicken and the egg sort of challenges, but we're trying to chip away at it piece by piece.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No problem.
I had a follow-up. Congratulations on the EPA ports grant. That's huge. We had competed for that and know how competitive that was. A couple of follow-ups. Related to what you just were talking about, how does the, I think I'm saying it right, with the Blue Highway program, how does that affect what you're doing and or open up opportunities? And I'm also kind of selfishly asking this, if, you know, in the past, there's been history well before your time and a little bit before mine, where there was a container on barge between the Port of New York and New Jersey and the Port of Albany, which we've, you know, tried to take a look at again. But I'm wondering if that might, the Blue Highway program may open that up, or if it's worth looking at again, and or just generally any other opportunities, or how that coordinates with what you're doing.
Yeah, I think we're very open to trying to find ways in which, you know, working with NAMHA, which is the North Atlantic Marine Highway Association, which is kind of the blanket group that we have, it's kind of gone a little quiet just because of the different strategies that have kind of been taking on, and we've had some leadership changes on that effort too. But we are interested in trying to see what that looks like. Blue Highways is a really interesting thing that the city, New York City, EDC, New York City DOT are working on. We're actually trying to help support that, trying to connect them. The interesting thing is the vast majority of the warehousing is based in New Jersey in this region, and then the vast majority of the market is here in the New York City metro region. So trying to connect the two and trying to find areas in which they can work together is actually one of the things we're trying to help support on that. But returning back to kind of more what I would call the longer distance Blue Highways operations, things like going up to Albany, going up to places like New London or to Providence or other places as well. You know, one of the conversations that I've had with a couple different folks throughout the region is that there are these great opportunities for the development of these facilities to support offshore wind, and that during the different peaks and valleys of the offshore wind opportunities, there's going to be you know, downtime. There's going to be lower capacity for through movement. Is there a way that, you know, there could be some leverage of some of those facilities to continue to create economic opportunities, continue to have jobs be servicing some sort of maritime function that would also support better goods movement? Looking at this in terms of a really holistic idea, you know, where could roll on, roll off trailers kind of fit into this conversation? Could that be something that doesn't take up as much space as a full container yard, but could that be something that helps activate some of these facilities when they're waiting for the next delivery of goods and materials to support the offshore wind facilities? Or, you know, do they have a segregated area that while there's part of the berth is open, they can be doing and servicing that sort of way? We've talked to the folks in New Bedford, Mass, who are really kind of way ahead of us here in the New York City region on offshore wind, and they've been pretty open to the idea of how do they use their yards and their facilities when there isn't any activity going on. They've had a lot of downtime between offshore wind components coming in and when the vessels are available to bring out the materials out. So we're talking about how those opportunities can kind of be fostered and developed. That being said, you know, container on barge is still a really good assistance in terms of providing more redundancy in the system, providing more resiliency. And I also think, you know, going back to the question about sustainability and utilizing alternative fuels, you know, the range on some of these truck systems that we have now for these electric trucks, it's, you know, it's on a good day, it's 250 miles. That might be better leveraged, making a lot of short trips to a smaller port and doing a lot of short drayage operations out of that port, rather than trying to drive all the way down to the Port of New York, New Jersey, dray all the way back up to Albany or to, you know, whether it's like somewhere in some of the Hudson Valley regions, it might make more sense for them to make, 10 short trips a day and have a quick turn rather than doing one, maybe two long turns every day. So that's a conversation we've been kind of having with some folks and seeing if there's any interest in that sort of different attack on trying to move goods and do drayage operations a little differently too.
Thank you for that answer. If you're willing, I'd love to follow up separately on this conversation and see if it's worth talking a little bit more.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Here, I'll put my screen back up with my contact info if anybody wants it as well.
If no one else has any questions, then I have just a couple of quick ones for you, Stefan. The first one, you mentioned you have the Port Authority operates a rail float to get from one side of the Hudson River to another, which as I'm getting up to speed on freight stuff, I didn't know that. That's very interesting. And so I'm just curious how often that's running. So you said without it, trains would have to go all the way up to Albany, presumably the Livingston Ave Bridge, and then come back down the other side of the Hudson River. So how often does that move rail cars across the river?
So they typically are crossing somewhere between 4 and 6 times a day. Sometimes they, depending upon how the tide and when the rail cars come in, is kind of the limitation on it. But actually, they're able to navigate for the most part as long as the tide isn't too high, as long as we don't have like a king tide or that the winds aren't too strong, they can navigate up to 6 times a day, I believe.
Great. And then my other question is just very, very generally, you touched about how the tariff situation is changing minute to minute. It's hard for people to keep up with it. At the port, are you seeing a decrease in container volume yet, or are things still kind of proceeding at a typical level?
So as I kind of alluded to before, the Chinese market which is the one that's most severely impacted by the tariffs. We have a really limited exposure compared to a lot of our other ports around the country. 30% of the goods coming into the US, imported goods, are manufactured or are originating from China. And of that 30%, only about 12% of that is coming through the Port of New York and New Jersey. Now, if you look at, by comparison, LA and Long Beach, almost 50%, if not more, of their goods are coming directly from China. Locations, surprisingly, places like Houston and Savannah, China is either their first or second market in terms of where they're getting their imports from. Actually, Houston's seen a tremendous amount of growth because of the Chinese importing Chinese goods that are then being shipped down to Mexico for their final production because of the way that the USMCA has been crafted. Houston is actually the primary port for a lot of the manufacturing in Mexico. So a lot of the other ports within the East Coast and also on the West Coast are really getting hit by this. Luckily, we haven't seen that same sort of impact. We've actually seen a lot of boost in volume over the past couple months. I'm waiting to see what our May numbers are because that's really the telltale sign. Since it takes about 50 days for vessels to sail from China to the Port of New York and New Jersey, it's a little bit hard to know exactly what the direct impact is. Also, anything that was already on the water before the tariffs that were announced doesn't qualify for those tariffs. So, but we're getting a lot of questions about fair trade zone or free trade zones, FTZs, and how those can be utilized and leveraged. So I think that there's a lot of uncertainty about what the importing market's going to look like over the next couple of months. We're kind of expecting that we'll see a bigger pickup probably in July once we see that time frame kind of collapse from when the tariffs were announced and then when they dropped down, and then the timing on everything for it to ship overseas kind of takes a while for us to see the direct impact.
Makes sense. All right, seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Stefan. This was very, very informative. I think people got a lot of information out of that, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come and present to us today.
Yeah, and if any, I'll leave my contact info on the screen for a minute or two more. And if anybody has any requests or conversations, please, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss, and I'm always looking for insights throughout the industry as well.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, we'll proceed on to the next part of our agenda. Bear with me a moment while I get everything set up. For those of you who are in the office, we do have coffee available now if you want to go grab a cup while we transition to this next piece of our agenda. All right, so we'll get right into these discussion items. I anticipate most of these won't be too long of a discussion, but if anyone has any questions or thoughts at any point, we'd love to hear them. So first, just a quick summary of the NYSAMPO freight presentations. So NYSAMPO is the New York State Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. The Transportation Council is the Metropolitan Planning Organization serving the Capital District. So these are our peers across the state. And there's a biannuals, every 2 years biannual conference where the MPOs, DOT, and other partners get together and present on a variety of topics. So one of the sessions was a freight related session. There were 3 presentations at that session, the first one being a very similar presentation to the one we just saw from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. It was a little more planner focused, a little more in the weeds with some of the technical stuff that goes into the planning, but very similar, talking about the logistics of the global supply chain, how that connects to local commodity movement, particularly in New York State. The second presentation was actually me with the Transportation Council presenting about the oversized, overweight wind turbine challenges that we're facing here. We'll talk about that a little more specifically in a later discussion item here, but we gave a presentation just talking about the challenges we're facing in moving these wind turbines from GE Vernova in Schenectady to Port of Albany, and just the challenges we're having and how we're working to address them, hopefully create a route that can be used to not take 3 days out in the Catskills, but also not go down Mark Street in downtown Albany. We're trying to figure that out and unwind it. And so we presented on where we're at with that so far. The last presentation was titled Transportation Implications of Regional Waste Movement. And that one was provided by the New York City MPO, NIMTIC. They talked about how they are handling, projecting, modeling, and preparing for decreased capacity, but increased generation of waste throughout the region, because down there, even more than areas like up here, they're running out of space where they can store waste material, but the region is still growing, so they're producing more waste and have decreased capacity. So they have done
Were you talking like household waste or like, commercial?
all of the above, everything from construction debris waste to household waste.
Was there a discussion on recycling and any impact recycling has been making?
There was, yeah. So they've done a whole study where they've modeled different scenarios about the region's growth, about consumer habits, and how recycling can decrease waste, how if we don't recycle more, what that would do to waste. They did a lot of modeling to look at different scenarios about how because they're looking at beyond just New York City, they're looking into Rhode Island, some areas of Massachusetts, New Jersey, because the waste in that area is all interconnected. And so they did a very in-depth presentation about what their current landscape looks like, what they're expecting it to look like, and how that might be impacted based on a variety of different variables that could impact it. And then they have recommendations that they identified based on the various scenarios about how it could how they could be prepared to not just be overwhelmed by waste generation moving forward. It was very interesting. There's some similarities to our regions here where we have several dumps. We have the one in Rensselaer, we have the one in town of Colony and city of Albany's dump, all of which are they're not about to reach their capacity, but it is something that's needing. Some of them are, and it's something that is there's not a great solution for, and so something that even here in our region, we could start preparing more about how to handle our waste as years come. And you know, we're one of the growing regions in the region, so our waste is not decreasing, but our capacity is decreasing.
Just as an aside, our friends at the Capital Region, Capital District Regional Planning Commission have been engaged in the regional waste conversation, and you know, it's been challenging to find a collaborative approach. As you may be aware,
Yeah,
one of the things that we recently partnered on was trying to reduce the waste stream for hard goods, like old furniture and things like that, collaborating with Habitat and some other entities to try to site a regional center for these goods. So that takes them out of the waste stream. So there's sort of these grassroots efforts
Yeah.
going on, but in terms of the bigger picture, they're kind of taking the lead, and it has been challenging.
you know, there are even some school programs where they create what's called like a repair cafe. So it's trying to instill the sense of fixing versus throwing out and starting
Right.
again or something like that.
Mhm.
But that's really interesting that they're taking that lead, because it feels like over the years, you know, either people don't want to take the lead and or the different geographies have different solutions, so
Right.
the holistic approach is challenging.
It is challenging, and I don't think we have the answers even now, but it's on our radar screen. We know the city of Albany's landfill is going to be closing in the next few years, so you know, we do have to prepare as a region.
Yeah, it was a very interesting presentation, and you know, if folks here would be interested, we could potentially reach out to NIMTIC to have them give a presentation to this group. But that's a potential option if people would be
I think
interested
that
in
would
that.
be interesting.
Yeah, it was.
Because sometimes it really also makes you reflect on what you're doing.
And it's not a problem that's going anywhere. It's something that's gonna need to be addressed. So those were the presentations given at this year's NISAMPO conference. They're very interesting. And now you've essentially heard two of them, because you bet this group's been involved with the oversized, overweight stuff here. Now you've heard the Port Authority's presentation. So if people be interested in the waste, I can certainly reach out to NIMTIC.
When
about
was
that.
that conference?
That conference was just in May, end of May.
Where?
Oh, where? Syracuse.
Oh, interesting.
All of the PowerPoints, if they're not already up, will be available shortly. So we didn't record the sessions, but we can certainly make the slide decks available to you guys.
Definitely.
And will the slide deck of the presentation that just occurred, will that be available?
I believe so. Stefan, can you confirm we'll be able to share these slides with the group?
Yeah, I should be able to.
Perfect. Yes, we'll send that to everyone when we send out the minutes for this meeting.
Yeah, I got the email for the NISAMPO presentations, I believe, last week, so.
Perfect.
Oh, great.
Those are up on their website.
Great. Yeah, we'll share all these presentations that once you can review all these different topics. No one has any further questions or discussion about these great presentations, we'll move on to our next item, which is the 2025 to 2030 Transportation Improvement Program. Like I mentioned at the top, for those who aren't aware, the TIP is our capital program. It's how we distribute federal funds throughout the region, which is kind of the primary purpose of the MPO, is to plan and then distribute funds for various projects. So all projects were scored for both their benefit cost ratio, but also a qualitative score based on the project type and the features that were being proposed in that project. So one of the evaluation areas for the projects was a freight evaluation. There were 3 questions that were used to evaluate those projects. It was whether the project is on or provides access to the freight priority network that we've identified here in the capital region, and provides reliability benefits. So it can't just be nearby but not provide those reliability benefits. Likewise, it can't provide reliability benefits, you know, out in the sticks, where there's not going to be any freight movement moving across them. The projects also receive points if they enhance access to a key freight generator. So, you know, we have a variety of manufacturers in our region that are generating freight. And if a project provided enhanced access, they receive points that way. They also receive points if they provided enhanced access to intermodal freight movement of any sort, whether that's rail, water, you know, truck to rail, water, freight, you know, the airlines, any sort of intermodal movement projects receive points for. And as far as the projects that were received, I'm now noticing the slide says freight scoring points, freight scoring projects. We did not have a ton. One of the categories for the tip was congestion, freight, and air quality. There were no projects submitted there that were specifically freight related. We got a lot of congestion and air quality related projects, but no freight specific projects. The projects that scored the best for freight were two bridge projects. The first being Route 9 West over I-787. That was a DOT project that received 5 freight points, which I believe was the maximum freight points a project could receive. That project was not funded because DOT had other priority bridges that they preferred to fund over this one, and our tip was pretty fiscally constrained this time. We didn't have a ton of money to spend on everything, so DOT just had other priority bridges that they spent money on. The second highest scoring freight project, or second project that scored the highest in the freight category, was County Route 33 over the Snook Kill Bridge. That's in Saratoga County, a project submitted by Saratoga County. It received 3 freight points, so not the full 5, but better than the majority of projects. And that project actually did get funded as a $4.2 million bridge project that should help enhance some of the freight movements in that region of Saratoga County. There were 9 projects that received 2 points and 8 projects that received 1 point in the freight category. Some were funded, some were not, but those projects were not, huge impacts on freight access in our region. And one potentially positive takeaway from this is that there were not a lot of freight projects submitted because most of the freight issues in the region have been identified and many of them have been addressed. Our regional freight plan was adopted, I believe, in 2016, identified freight projects throughout the region that could be addressed to enhance the freight system. But most of those have been completed now. So Transportation Council is hopefully in the next, nearest future going to be updating that freight plan to identify a new set of projects that we can address and we can pursue. And hopefully that will feed more into the next TIP update in 3 years. We can get some more freight focused projects funded. So does anyone have any questions or comments about the 2025 to 2030 TIP? Hearing none, we will move on to our long-range plan update, the the Plan 2050, our long-range metropolitan transportation plan, and I will turn it over to Sandy to present on this.
Thanks. And go to the next slide. So I know we're getting short on time, so I'll try to zip through this quickly. For those that don't know, we are in the process of developing a new regional transportation plan that'll replace what we've talked about for years here, the New Visions plan. It's going to be called In Motion, the Plan to 2050. This is a federally required document, but it really sets the foundation for how we invest in the transportation system here in the capital region. And we build this plan collaboratively with our public sector partners, the public, stakeholders in the region, etc. Next slide. The plan's updated every 5 years. We started this process back in 2023 and used these 5 phases to build the plan. We did a data collection phase. We did an inform phase, which was us sharing our existing conditions with the public, but also the public telling us what they wanted or needed in the region, what they thought our priorities should be. Then we did an imagine phase where we sort of planned scenarios and thought about what 2050 is going to look like in the capital region. Now we're kind of getting into the decision, actually finishing the decision-making phase on what are the priorities, what are the strategies and actions we're going to be taking as a region over these next few years to try to achieve this vision. And then we're going to be reviewing and adopting the plan with the goal of completing everything for our policy board's adoption in September. And a lot of this work was guided by our In Motion task force. A couple of you were on the committee, so we thank you for your involvement in that. Next slide. And we're in the process now of pulling together the document. It'll be a 7-chapter document that we're trying desperately to make as accessible without the techno speak that we all use here, and limit the body of the report to 100 pages. So that anybody can pick it up and read through it and not be intimidated by it. And it will be complemented by a 10-page executive summary. But if you really want to do a deep dive into all the components, lots of appendices with many, many pages of information. So next slide. We've had to massage some language, and it was kind of alluded to in an earlier presentation about, changes at the federal level in terms of priorities, and the use of terminology. And so we've had to change some of our language, but the spirit of what we're gonna be doing here has remained unchanged. So in the vision statement, we still maintain the goal of having a clean and efficient transportation system. You will see that goods are specifically highlighted in the vision statement. We're trying to make sure we support economic development and quality livable communities. And we want to make sure that we still promote new development in the region, adapt technologies, protect the environment, and improve the system's performance overall. Next slide. And, we've kind of boiled everything down to these 5 goals, which is making sure we have a safe transportation system, that we provide good mobility, and maintain the system in a state of good repair, that we provide as many choices through access as possible. Again, that livability, which is our catch-all for sort of making sure that we have quality communities and support economic development, and that our system is resilient, whether it's responding to natural hazards like floods, that we have plans in place to adapt where needed. We're spending a lot of time making sure our system is as resilient as we can. Next slide. So part of what we put in our regional transportation plan is a list of priority projects. And these are the ones that go beyond what we have funding for locally here, in terms of anticipated funding in some cases. In some cases, we do when we look out to 2050. So the top group, that's highlighted in white, we're in the category of fiscally constrained. What we're saying here is that these are bigger dollar value projects, and this list was comprised of anything that we estimated today would cost at least $25 million, with the exception of trails, where we dropped the threshold down to $10 million for their construction. And we believe that, at least based on the projections and the information we have today, that everything in white, we can fund through 2050. And you'll note, Ethan just referred to the 9W over 787 bridge replacement project. That $65 million cost estimate is one of the reasons why that wasn't successfully funded in our tech. We just don't have the resources locally. So we're going to be looking for outside help, whether that's from New York State grants, whether that's from future federal grants, whatever these resources are, we're going to have to go beyond what we have here, access to here at our MPO locally.
What is that? I'm sorry, I feel silly. I don't know
Yep.
what that is.
That bridge?
Yeah.
So if you can picture the end of 787, the throughway exit comes up to the 9W bridge, which goes over 787.
Yeah.
And it's that bridge that needs to be replaced.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And with the Reimagine 787.
Yep,
Does that number also include the Dunn Bridge?
correct. So the ones in the bottom of the list where we have the term illustrative, these are ones that we definitely need to go out and find. We definitely don't have these resources, but the dollar value for the Reimagining 787 includes all of the alternatives. That's why you're seeing a range there. So even to maintain that facility in a state of good repair, which is replacing it in kind, right? Because it's actually getting to the end of its useful life in some instances, it's still going to cost us $3 billion. So when we talk about Reimagining 787 publicly, we like to remind everybody that there is a cost to doing nothing, right? It's not like investing 6 billion versus we're still going to be investing 3 billion in that regardless. No matter what the scenario is, even the boulevarding scenarios are still $3 billion. So it's an expensive project, but it's one why it's rising. There's a lot of reasons why it's rising to priority. But one of the factors from an economics perspective is if you can envision the area in downtown Albany with the giant stack of ramps that connect to the Dunn, that section alone, that bridge deck, it's costing us upwards of 10% of our total maintenance budget here in the entire Region 1 of DOT, which is an 8-county area. 10% a year goes into just maintaining that. And that is why it's important that we look at this big dollar value investment, because if we can, there's a cost benefit in terms of that longer term maintenance. But That one, along with the 378 bridge replacement between Rensselaer and Albany County, and the proposed reconfiguration of the exit 4C area on 890, which is over by the now SUNY Schenectady in Schenectady. Those three projects are well beyond our local resources and are gonna need some long-term outside help.
And it,
Yep, go ahead, I'm sorry.
go ahead,
Mike,
Mike.
you first, please.
I just was curious if the Castleton Bridge is in,
So the Castleton Bridge is funded, that's why you're not seeing it here.
I have a question for you in terms of the 787.
Mhm.
Talk about a soccer stadium, talk about, offshore wind, both sides of the river development.
Yeah.
From a trucking perspective, are you looking at, the flow of over-dimensional or heavy weight trucks over that bridge on 787, or the traffic flow from is all
Yeah.
inclusive, I guess?
So the conceptual study, which is called the Planning and Environmental Linkages Study, is about to wrap up. That got us to a certain level of detail. The state of New York just awarded DOT about almost $40 million to now jump into this next level of design, where we're gonna do that deeper dive. And I know the Port has been coordinating with DOT on this very topic. Our friends here at Dagan have been helpful to, shed light on the oversized overweight issue. So I think in the context of that, all of that design work, that will be certainly a major topic that will be
Yeah,
looked at.
because if you say manufacture on either side of the river, that would be critical. The ability to get in and out with
Yep.
heavy freight to
And
the ports.
And I don't want to speak for you, but my understanding is when the port was, the alternatives in the current study were shared, there were some that, were more attractive to the port than others. And it will just kind of remain to be seen how this plays out as the design process
because sometimes
unfolds.
even as you would know, sometimes even the approach could be a challenge versus even the being able to have the capacity.
So all of these, as you see, there's a number of bridges. Bridges are kind of our major thing that we're learning in terms of regional needs. It affects the oversized and overdimensioned vehicles because of the weight. And some of the weight restricted bridges we have, so it's all tying together as part of this plan. And this is gonna be the 10,000-foot view of the world, but we're gonna be getting into some of these other topics as we dig into the work that Ethan's working on right now, as well as the future update of the freight plan. So next slide. So I'll briefly go through the strategies and actions as they relate to freight. So I've paired this back to be specific to this group today. We have 7 categories of strategies and actions: maintaining infrastructure in a state of good repair, making sure we have a connected system of multiple options, resilience, making sure it operates well, integrating transportation land use planning, supporting economic development, and then coordinating the strategies of numerous plans in the region. So that we're all talking the same language and working together. So next slides. So some of the freight focused strategies, we've mentioned a couple of times, updating the 2016 freight plan. NISDOT recently completed the New York State Freight Plan. So now that that is done, I would suspect 2026 will probably launch into updating our freight plan. So these next 6 months or so will be helpful for Ethan as our freight planner now to kind of hear from you folks on what some of the specific issues are. We're well aware of this overdimension topic, but we know there's a lot of other things and that can help build a new freight plan, refine the freight priority network that's defined in that document, and other topics. Next slide. So one of the other presentations that Ethan didn't mention at our statewide conference was freight efficient land uses, and there's been some work done out of RPI. I think Jeff is listening in today to talk about this issue. And I'm sorry, the picture is grainy. I pulled it from one of the NHRCP reports. I'm saying that acronym wrong. But it's one of the research reports that RPI contributed to, and they used a facility, not to be named, that was looking to site a distribution center in the capital region for last mile internet deliveries. I think you can read between the lines of who that was. And you know, what the images are showing you is they had a decision to make between a site in Colony and a site in Amsterdam. They ended up picking the site in Amsterdam. However, from a transportation perspective, that's 37 miles away versus from this metro center versus 8 here in the, if they had cited in the capital regions, creating 20 miles of travel for each one-way trip. And when you roll that up on an annual basis in terms of vehicle miles of travel, it's 800,000 freight VMT a year just from that one decision. So one of the things that we'll be trying to look at is how could we, as a region, make siting these facilities locally more attractive, right? And having a better connection to that. And that again ties to the oversized overweight topic because you know, when we're thinking about goods, a lot of us think about small things like pens and hockey pucks, but we're not thinking about the really big things like wind turbines and other equipment. Next slide. Goes without saying, you know, potholes, the condition of the system, the condition of the bridges, that's very important to goods movement. And we're thinking about even developing maybe a regional payment condition model or some kind of an asset management system. It's interesting that you're talking about the X16 bridge today. I highlighted that one here because we know that's been a longstanding priority that we're happy has been funded and is moving forward. But that's an example of a bridge that has reached the end of its useful life. And you know, we're happy that given the freight movement around X16 on the Northway that, you know, we're investing in that facility to make things better. Slide. We talked a bit about resiliency today. So one of the things we're looking to do is identifying these vulnerabilities in our system. As you know, the spot in front of Stuyvesant Plaza is a common one. There's ones on I-90. There's other I-90 on Central Avenue underneath I-90 that are popping up now as regular, like avoid this area because it's flooded. So we need to identify those vulnerabilities, and there's other vulnerabilities as well. We'll be working on building a local road infrastructure resilience plan, and planning for these emergencies. So, you know, what information can we collaborate with our statewide partners, whether it's a flood incident, whether it's a major crash like the one you're seeing in this picture from the Thruway not all that long ago. You know, how do we do better? And getting information out there to make sure the traveling public has the information they need to reroute and the system has as much redundancy in it as we can build. Next slide. This is sort of our technology topics. So, you know, we have a transportation management center and we think there's more opportunity to use technology in our region to exchange information. So developing a traffic signal and technology program is important. Implementing what we call the TSMO strategies, and I still did that backwards, TSMO it should be, Transportation Systems Management and Operations. So these are all the strategies that help to improve the efficiency of the system by improving technology, by having more information for folks on the roadway system. How do we work with the GPS community on freight routing in the region? A very common concern I get from every community is we don't like where the trucks are going in our region and they're on the wrong streets in our community, right? So, you know, how do we make sure that these folks are where they're supposed to be and make sure that the roads that they're designated to use are up to par, so that they are not diverting off of these roads. That may be included, you know, spot widenings and maybe some connector roads or maybe some other tools in that toolbox that we'll be exploring.
Would you explore AI?
Yeah, so we've been talking about AI and it's something we're learning more about for sure. And I think that's something that is in that toolbox.
Yeah.
I think the transportation field is definitely learning a lot more.
Agreed.
Yeah. And then, you know, some people still chuckle at the automated vehicles and advanced air mobility, but here's the thing, right? This stuff is getting used already in the country. We have drones being tested in Westchester County Airport as well as up in Burlington. It's not that far off that this stuff is going to be coming to the capital region. So we need to think about these things. And automated freight vehicles are being used around the country already. So, you know, we need to think about the planning for that. We certainly want to implement parking management and curb management strategies and build a resource library, if you will, for these strategies for communities. We have our recently completed truck parking study that, will hopefully help contribute toward that. And then we heard through some of these other presentations today about first and last mile transportation, and how we can make that more efficient for goods movement. Side. So next steps, we have a survey that I will be sending out this week. So this group will get it directly on these strategies, and what we're hoping for input on is I focus on the freight. There's a lot more in this, obviously, than freight, but what I would be interested to know is what did I not speak to? What issue are you like, hey, she's completely missed this? And we're really interested in getting your feedback on those strategies and what else we can include. Knowing again, this is a sort of the 20,000-foot view of the world. We're wrapping up developing our financial plan right now. We do think we have a fiscally constrained plan in that $1 billion over the 2050, over the 25-year life of this plan through 2050 will be available for other initiatives, but I say that with caution. It doesn't mean we have a $1 billion right now to invest in things. Will probably be eaten up by inflation, by cost increases, by other initiatives that we're not envisioning, but at least from the information we have today, we should be fine. We're going to be looking at our federal performance measures, including the freight specific one. We'll have a draft plan at the absolute latest by our August planning committee meeting. We're hoping to have it for our July meeting, and then we'll open up public review to finalize things in September. So that's the status of our in motion plan. But again, if there's freight related topics that are important to you that weren't mentioned, feel free to email Ethan, fill out our upcoming survey. We'd love to hear from you. Again, you might see some language changes because of the current administration. But the spirit of what we're trying to do is still going to be there. And we're going to continue to push forward on developing a quality transportation system for the capital region.
Does that go to USDOT?
The plan?
Yeah.
So they do see it. They do not have an approval authority. So they do see them, they do review them. The only documents that our USDOT partners have approval authority of is our TIP and our planning work program, which is our unified planning work program. But this one, they do not have an approval. Gives us a little more flexibility, to be honest, in some of the terms.
Great, thanks, Sandy. I don't see any questions on the Zoom either, so move into our next topic, which is the overdimensioned truck routing that we've been mentioning throughout this whole meeting. This is a project that many of you have heard about before. It's not a new issue, and as Jim will tell you, it's not an issue that's going away. Unfortunately, with the departure of Chris and then the update to our TIP and our MTP, the project's kind of stalled. So we're really trying to ramp it up because even with changes at the federal level, everything that's been going on, it's still an issue that needs to be addressed. Just the other day, Jim shared with me a route they got approved that was 38 denials before you were finally able to get it approved, which is just ridiculous. So right now we are working to get together some of the folks involved in this project. So Dagon Trucking, the ports, the local municipalities involved, DOT, the throughway, everyone we can we can get into a room and say, okay, how can we address this? So right now that's what we are working on setting up, because we have this map that you see up there that shows different routes, different facilities that aren't usable, has all these little trouble spots. But these trouble spots are there's always more being added to them as bridges get downgraded for their weight capacity, as new infrastructure is installed in various locations. It's kind of ever changing. So we're working right now to try and get people together so we can figure out the best strategy to actually address it going forward, to make sure this doesn't kind of just fall out of everyone's minds, because it's a very important issue for our region that we really need to address. So no major updates to it now. Hopefully at our next meeting, we'll have this stakeholder meeting, we'll have a path forward. That is the status of this initiative.
I just wanted to say, I appreciate that you do persist on it. There are quality of life issues, people can consider, but there's also just a significant economic development, issue in addition to the transportation aspect.
Yeah.
We look at this at the port of not only how will this move this time, but how well does this go that it will enable and encourage a next time.
Yeah.
There are choices that companies can make
Yeah.
of where they invest and where they do the activities, so.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Of course, yeah, we're very fortunate to have GE Vernova in our region, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that they are able to produce and move the goods that they do manufacture throughout our region. So this is a very important topic for us. Our next update will be pretty quick. The Capital District Clean Communities Program that's managed by Adam Carville, like I mentioned, he was not able to make it today, so I just have a couple quick updates of stuff that has been going on at the Transportation Council. Recently, Transportation Council staff were able to get a tour of the NISIO facility. That's the New York State Independent System Operator. They're the folks who manage the electrical grid for all of New York State, and they're located just right across the river. And that was a very interesting tour. We got to see kind of the interconnectivity between all the power producers within the region, but then they also gave us a lot of information about how they're forecasting electric vehicle and other alternative energy vehicle adoption, because that is obviously going to have a huge impact on the electrical grid. So I don't have the specific data on me, but if anyone's interested in seeing those projections, I'd definitely recommend reaching out to Adam. He can provide you with whatever information he's allowed to from NISIO. But it was very interesting seeing how they're projecting both passenger vehicles and commercial vehicle uptake for its alternative fuels. Transportation Council staff also tabled at the New York State Electric Fleet event. That was just at the end of May down at the Empire Plaza. And I don't have a ton of information about that because it was Adam and another of our staff members that attended. But if you would like any information, I think they looked at a variety of vehicles for all sorts of different types of commercial fleets, whether it's, passenger vehicles for offices that are sending staff out all over the place, to electric school buses, electric buses, electric, I'm not sure if they actually had like tractor trailers or what all they had, but there was a wide variety of alternative fuel and electric vehicle options and alternatives that were presented at that event. So anyone interested in any of those topics or any other Capital District Clean Communities topics, alternative fuel, please reach out to Adam Carville and he'd be happy to talk to you about any of those topics. So our next and last discussion item for today is the I-787 exit 16 bridge replacement, and I'll turn it over to Valerie to talk us through that.
So, as was mentioned earlier, DOT is looking at replacing the exit 16 bridge on I-87, the Adirondack Northway up in Wilton at Ballard Road. And the bridge will be replaced to the north of the existing bridge, and the project will include interchange improvements to improve traffic flow and reduce bottlenecks, particularly for freight vehicles, given the distribution centers and truck stops in the area. And one alternative that we're considering is having roundabouts on each end of the bridge where the interchange ramps touch down, similar to what exists in Malta at exit 12, pictured on the slide there. And we would like to get thoughts and feedback, particularly from the trucking community on this, because we know that there can be trying to think of how to phrase it. It's like it's navigating the roundabouts and how the trucks feel about going through them.
And there's a lot of truck traffic through this spot. So I've added a slide that shows the exit 16 interchange.
Yeah, and we're currently funded for state fiscal year 2027 with the survey work to begin this spring, and scoping should begin soon.
Is DOT considering doing what type of roundabouts? Because I think the ones in Malta are like they're planted
Hardscapes.
hardscape. They have plants in them and stuff. Is DOT considering that type of roundabout here, or something that's flatter?
I'm not sure exactly. I believe most of the ones we install are the hardscape, but It's
So-
early in the process, so I don't believe a specific type has been identified yet.
I mean, while most of the goods being moved through that area are, tied to Target and some of the retailers at those distribution centers, and they tend to use the 40-foot trucks. I don't speak for my friend here, but, increasingly trucks do get larger. And because you have Scotty's at this location where trucks are coming off, and that's really one of the few spots that they can pull off and spend the night. I would just make sure if you're even thinking about roundabouts, that they are designed in a way that limits the hardscaping as much as humanly possible, or we've heard of some examples from Europe. I don't know if they're used in the United States about having either a gate or something that the truck can pass through the middle of it if, they're large enough. But certainly if you're thinking about roundabouts in that location, you really need to think about how they're designed. Because doing the standard footprint
Yeah.
might not be good for the trucks up
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Just for example, the one in Malta is it's way bigger than a normal roundabout. It's 2 lanes and it's somewhat manageable. There's a recent one down in, there's a detour on 88 for a weight restricted bridge, and we had to get off in Bain Bridge on, Route 206. We went through there last week and it was like, we made it, but, the day we made it with no issues, we had to go the wrong way and take some signs out and stuff, but after that. DOT put a restriction that there's no oversize at all, even a little truck going through there anymore.
Yeah.
So we're just that's another place that we can't go now.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, and ties to why we need to identify a route or series of connections for the oversized vehicles, because you folks design to the certain type size truck. And if we're not designing to the right type of truck, it really does limit what companies like Dagan can do. It's good to hear that the double laners might be wide enough to accommodate the larger trucks, but yeah, certainly the single laners are more problematic for sure.
Just a little historical note, I remember opening a roundabout, I think it was on 29 east of the Northway, quite a few years ago, and watching the oncoming traffic start using that for the first time, and encouraging the tractor trailers that it's okay on a hardscape if your back duals do run over a small curve that's part of the inner circle. And we were saying, that's okay, you can come on, you can come on.
But now they're carrying how many tons are?
The suspension of the trailers, they have to go around that.
I'm sorry?
Do you understand what it does to the suspension of the trailers when you have to do that if you got a load on?
Yeah.
I navigate through those Malta roundabouts. I'll be doing that tomorrow and I'll be coming back through there tomorrow. When you're taking up all of the lanes, and the one roundabout where you're in the left lane, you have to get over onto 9. You have to pull into the right lane right as the exit's coming off. Nobody understands that unless you go about it and you own the truck yourself, what that does to the suspension of it, especially if you got a load on. These roundabouts were not designed for 53-foot trailers hauling 72 feet down the road. I've been in the trucking industry since 1967. And I'm still trucking. As being a supervisor in our town. So, and I don't think anybody over here has been in the trucking business as long as I have. Maybe you're not as old as I am. Not since 1967, that dates my age, I'm still trucking.
There was another.
Florida has a lot of intersections, I don't know what they call them, but it's they kind of crisscross under the bridges in the intersection, so you go on to it proves, I don't know what the name of it is.
Yeah. it's
The
almost like-
diverging diamonds.
It's like the northbound goes on the other side of the road to get on the exit, so you don't have to get the lights, and then it crosses over in the middle.
Yeah,
But that is way more efficient than anything that we have. I know Florida, Arizona,
it's almost like a
Mexico has it.
designated.
the
area,
road
truck
crosses
area.
them, instead of like at the bridge where you gotta sit there and make a left to get onto the, onto the interstate, it like crosses like a almost like a curved X or in like a. Whatever they have a design, whatever that's called, it seems, it works way better than rotaries.
I think that's
Yeah.
called the diverging diamond.
We have
Well,
two in
aren't
New
you talking
York.
about Route 7 over the north?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
a
different.
little Buey,
It's a little
Yeah,
different, but
single point urban interchange.
yeah, the
Which is working well as far as I can see.
Yeah.
right, the problem, and this is where the money comes in, is spewies are very expensive to build. So the diverging diamond actually reduces the physical footprint, given that we're building a bridge here. But those are definitely options that NISDOT should be looking at for this location, because
especially with the truck stuff.
this is heavy freight through here. This is not just the standard 5%.
So what would be the reason to do a roundabout?
They're often considered through the design process because they are efficient. In terms of processing cars, you eliminate the need for a physical traffic signal, which has a maintenance and a cost to it as well. The drawback is in an area like this, when you're dealing with a large percentage of larger vehicles. You may run into trouble, particularly the left turn coming off the interstate.
Backing up onto the interstate.
What's
at
the
the
progressive
place.
plans?
Yeah,
in the
they
future
also-
In terms of zoning and what the town is looking at doing.
Right.
I don't know if they're, maybe they'll quadruple the amount of truck
Right.
traffic in the next 20 years there.
That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah,
Just because of its location, there's an additional distribution center that comes in, so that's really something to consider.
And it is a tight interchange because Scotty's is so close to the one intersection there, so there's probably some considerations about keeping the footprint as tight as they can.
And that's a lot of why we look at the roundabouts as well, because with a conventional interchange, there needs to be space for left turn lanes. So with the roundabouts, that can be eliminated and a smaller bridge footprint can be built.
Right.
So you really do have to weigh the decision here. It's interesting.
Another point to this is the inexperience of young drivers trying to navigate
Yeah.
through these roundabouts. And the drivers are out there today. Many of them can't read road signs or communicate with an officer, which has always been a law that you were supposed to be following. But they seem to have gotten away from that. That is a requirement to have a CDL. You're supposed to be able to read road signs and communicate with an officer. The president just signed an order that this law has to be adhered to. I don't know what that's gonna affect all of the drivers that are out there that are foreign drivers that certainly can't speak English or communicate with an officer.
They're enforcing it down south or.
What do you mean communicate?
That's why that bridge in Glenville is
English.
hit all the time. One of the reasons.
With an officer though, like say at a stop.
They're finding that they're not able to speak English.
Yeah.
When they're pulled over.
You're supposed to be able to speak English and communicate with an officer.
Arkansas makes you
Read
go
the road
into
signs.
the way station, if you get pulled into the way station in Arkansas, and they make you read a page off the Cat in the Hat book.
We've had discussions with our legal team as a manufacturer. About giving freight, because we're at the point where you're giving it to somebody who speaks English or not, and what happens if your freight gets impounded at one of these truck stops or something, so it's something that's. If it gets enforced much, on a grander scale, it's gonna create challenges in terms of, what's the process to do if somebody doesn't speak English?
Yeah, and I think this one is a solvable one, right? It's just making sure these drivers do get trained for, if this is a rule, to your point, like if it was always a rule, just making sure that the resources are provided to folks, because we're gonna need the humans to still drive the trucks, right? Just taking the human out of the equation, at least for the short term, isn't really the option. So making sure they're trained properly is the better scenario, so.
We don't know if this is gonna be adhered to in every state.
Right,
But,
of course.
that's always been on the rule books that you had to do
Right.
that.
I mean, we have the unique
These drivers
situation
are
of
all
Canadian,
hazmat, have a hazmat endorsement.
right? I mean, we have the unique situation of Canadian drivers, being through here, that some of which may not speak English well, so.
I've had a hazmat endorsement since first came out.
So I guess the message back to the department on the roundabout idea is be careful.
Also, the roundabout, it snows a lot up that way, but in
Yeah,
the winter where if you need the trailer to get onto the.
There's mountain snow on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it any easier.
right.
What happens when you get to a time, see if it's in the future too.
Yeah, just like you said, when you go up on it with the different, different weights, if you putting bearing on a suspension and the tires, you get blowouts there, you're gonna have to block the intersections and all that.
Yeah. That was interesting about the European model, where you could go right through.
Yeah, and we need to find those resources. We keep talking about it. We should find some examples and maybe someone who can speak to it, because it would be interesting to share innovative designs with this year.
That is definitely an interesting concept.
United States.
Yeah.
They're
They're shorter trailers.
Yeah, they're shorter, they steer, but Europe, we went to France last year and they have in the center of the roundabout, instead of putting trees and all the stuff, they have a gate that opens, or those pylons that come out of the ground. Or if you're gonna go through with a truck, they can't maneuver it, something like. If you have a police escort or something, they can activate it so you can go straight to the middle of it instead of.
Yeah.
And you also gotta know that there's a push on to increase it from 53 to 58 foot trailers. That's been going on for years, and I got a feeling someday it's gonna go through.
The one out west there.
They already have them, that's correct.
Bigger trailers.
Yeah, we'll do some research.
But 72 feet, you're gonna add another 5 feet on them.
Yeah, we might pick your brain, just in terms of sites you might know around the country.
Great. Well, that's some really good feedback, I think. Valerie, are you okay if we share your email in the minutes in case anyone has any additional? Yeah, anyone here, yeah. We can get you Valerie's contact information if anyone has any additional comments that come up at any point. So thank you everyone for that feedback. That's our last discussion item. So now we'll go into member up. Yeah.
Just make it high enough underneath on 87 to.
Yeah, there's a height requirement, but I
Make it
heard that,
higher.
I heard it's not high enough for his stuff, so. It's tough because the offshore wind units in particular, you can't get under those interstate bridges now, and DOT just invested in those interstate bridges. So, yeah, it needs to be, actually need to be higher. than what
Right
the
now,
bid
that's
design.
probably 15.7, 15.8 under clearance, make it up if you're gonna rebuild it, put it new for the next.
Yeah.
100 years, make it 16, 17 foot underneath if you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, especially if you're putting roundabouts, because then it'll affect every truck going up the ramp to go back down.
Great. All right, so member updates. So this will be the time if anyone has, any freight related concerns that they're going into, any events going on, anything that anyone wants to share. Anyone in the chat, raise your hand. I'll call on you. Is there anyone in the room that has anything? I think Dagan just did their truck pull recently. How'd that go?
That's good, we raised $95,000 in one day for the Special Olympics.
Setting record.
Congratulations.
It really is
The
amazing.
truck show this year, for the first time, there's 40 entry.
Oh.
So the truck show and the truck float keeps getting bigger every year, 20 teams.
That's right.
Nice.
It's a truck show.
No, in Castleton, Norway. Every the second Sunday of each May.
Awesome.
Wednesday.
May, every year.
So anyone-
I could share a couple
Yeah,
updates. I think
please do.
at the port, we've mentioned in other meetings. We were successful with the New York State DOT PFRAP grant for the port and rail infrastructure, and we've been planning and designing and now bidding related to the on-dock heavy rail project. So bids have been out related to that work. We expect that actual work will occur next year due to the timing of everything in the construction cycle, but that's a big deal for us, that on-dock heavy rail is key for freight movement. We did apply to another PFRAP round. We're excited to hear about that, but we think that might be in early fall. But that one's related to equipment, so interestingly, the gentleman was still here. We applied for equipment, including another mobile harbor crane. The Port of Albany first got one of those. close to 25 years ago when we were doing that container on barge movement. But then since it's just been a requirement of the work that we do, so it goes to show the progression of work at the port. That would be to eventually take out one of the outdated cranes. But we've also asked for support related to some zero emission equipment. So we're, also trying to do some of that renewable initiative. We have been pursuing, in fact, we'll have a meeting right after this related to the foreign trade zone designation as well. The port used to be one and has gotten a lot of inquiries related to that. And so we'll be working with Kate Maynard on taking a look at that for the Port of Albany. I just wanted to mention, we did have a pretty national level security drill at the port. I don't know if folks saw that, but I think today is the last day of that. Our security department and our CEO have been leaders on that, and it's, been very interesting to see from across the road, so to speak, what's going on, but it's a good exercise in preparedness on, pretty major scale. And all kinds of levels of security has been involved with that. And then also on the maritime movement, we expect some of these GE pieces related to the onshore winds to start moving shortly coming into the port. Is it today? Which is so cool.
Today's the first day.
So that will hopefully fill up some parts of the port's maritime and eventually head to Australia, which is, very cool for us to see.
Awesome. And the port recently put out the
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yes. We did, the port did issue related to our expansion area that had been permitted, designed, approved for offshore wind manufacturing. In light of, we've made substantial progress on that site development related to development ready in response to where things stand on the industry. We did issue a request for expression of interest. Thank you for mentioning that. We've gotten a lot of interest in some questions and some site visits. Those aren't due until the end of this month. But that is a way for us to really assess either related to offshore wind and manufacturing, or related to supply chain and manufacturing, or related to maritime type utilization of the space. And we've been doing a number of tours. We'll see what comes of that. We do also still have a grant application in and pending with NYSERDA related to the wharf construction of that site, which would be for short and long-term consideration. It would be a very heavy capacity wharf build. So even though things are challenging related to offshore wind, we're still eager to see what NYSERDA decides in terms of funding port infrastructure preparedness, and that's what's in for us with that.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else in person or online have any updates? All right, great. So the last thing is just going over the remaining meeting schedule for the rest of the year. So our next meeting is August 20th. That's a little less than 3 months, just since this meeting is pushed back. That's our regular schedule. And then November 19th at 2025. The meetings historically have been scheduled for 9 a.m. Part of that was because his schedule started at 8 a.m. Our staff now is more 8:30, 9 o'clock start. Does the 9:30 start time seem to work for people? There's no major objections. We might move to 9:30 typical start time.
It's actually good. I'll let you do some stuff.
Yeah, don't have to come straight here. Okay, great. Well, then we'll probably move forward with 9:30 for start time for these meetings going forward. And if anyone has any presentation topics that come up at any point, feel free to reach out to me and I can try and coordinate presentations. Sound like there was some interest in that waste presentation, so I can reach out about that. But as you're going about your day-to-day work, if there's ever a topic that comes up, you're like, how does this work? Why does this work? Even if it's not related to your work, just a freight related topic that occurs to you and you'd like some more information about, reach out to me and I can see we can get someone to come and speak about it, because we're a big benefit of this group is this wide reaching kind of education from these presentations, so. Thank you, everyone, for coming. If you ever have any questions about our freight program, reach out to me. I'm still getting up to speed, like I said, but you know, all of you have a lot of resources that also can help me, so if you think something is so simple that of course everyone knows it, I might not still, so feel free to reach out to me with any
The sign-in sheet today?
Yes, there was a sign-in sheet up at the front, so
Sorry, I was late.
that is A-okay.
Appreciate you coming.
All right, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you in August.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.